Sorry. Welcome everybody to the program today. Mondo Gonzalez here in studio, and I have through the internet, which is wonderful, our good friend Graham Keelan, all the way from Bristol, England. Graham, welcome.
Hey, Mondo. Good to join you again.
Yes, and it's been good. It's been a while since we had a chance to really chat, and there's so much happening now over the last really couple months since Trump has come into the administration. No doubt, in his own way, a wrecking ball in so many things. But also, I think some things need to be wrapped for sure. So I thought it would have been great to hear your perspectives on things coming from, again, the UK. Let's kind of jump right in because there's so much to discuss. From your perspective here, just looking at some of my notes, it seems that the relationship between America and Europe and even maybe NATO in general, well, let me just ask you, is it weakened? Is it fracturing? Is it breaking apart? I've seen that no doubt what Trump has done, a couple things, has pushed some of the European nations to increase their own funding for their own European army. I mean, is Trump, whether he knows it or not, contributing to the development of a European army, which might be the Beast Army? I mean, kind of jump in on all of that from your perspective, being right there in the midst of it.
Yeah, well, we have this conversation, Mondo, on Liberation Day, President Trump's declaration of Liberation Day for the US, and the markets are tanked, so I can see. And also, Marco Rubio is in the NATO headquarters, laying down the law, as it were, for the new American attitude towards the Northern Atlantic Treaty Organization. Yeah, I think, well, is it fracturing? Listen, there are a lot of shrill voices here over in the European arena, and I think, well, there's that thing about there's a new sheriff in town, isn't there? And it's more that the old assumptions now have gone in terms of American involvement in NATO, and simply because. So you look at it from both points of view. So from the American point of view, of course, you've been carrying NATO, and with your massive expense, your expenditure. I mean, you are now like coming up to 40 trillion in debt, something like that, in the national debt. And quite frankly, the Americans can no longer afford to carry the bulk of certainly of European security. And so they're saying, hey, look, it's time for you to stump up. Interestingly, reading about this.
Hi, Diane.
This has been going on since Eisenhower.
Diane, sometimes I don't get a chance to let you know I'm going to be late. So sorry about that.
The Americans have been trying to get the Europeans to cough up all the way since the 50s, right? And so, obviously out of World War II, they got the Cold War. Europe was decimated during World War II, so it relied very much heavily on American, the Marshall Plan, the rebuilding of the continent, and also then the security of Western Europe at the time. Of course, the Berlin Wall came down. Was it 89? Was it 90? I'm forgetting that. But and then from that, NATO sort of began its glorious expansion eastward, even though apparently the Russians were promised that wouldn't happen. But anyway, here we are. Yeah. So now what's 32 nations, 31 nations. And what's really interesting is that, I can get it from the American point of view, because the Europeans have allowed.
Diane, I try and stream not only one day. I try not to stream one day so I can keep in touch.
Have used American largesse to literally build these incredibly intricate and expensive welfare states.
Mm-hmm.
When you sort of like you know, you look at NATO spending, European spending. I think at the time of the Cold War, I think we were spending nearly 5% or something on defence. Well, that kind of plummeted over the years to about 2%, just really fulfilling our NATO obligations because we were the joint founders of NATO with the US. So from that, of course, I mean, we
And Di, if I'm not streaming, I always give you a heads up.
followed out our armed forces to where we now have the lowest standing army since Napoleon. Can you believe it, right? So we've now only got just about 70,000 soldiers in the field and 150,000 total personnel. And we've got one of the largest European armies. Well, we are actually the greatest European nation using that whole category of defense spending. We are it. Not in terms of GDP now, because Poland now is really upping its spending, but in terms of, I think, 58 billion. I think 58 billion pounds, nearly 60 billion pounds. But we spent 100 billion on our interest payments alone. So we spend more on our interest payments than we do on defense, education, and justice combined.
What is your national debt?
Our national debt, I think, is about 1.2 trillion. It's almost 100.
I'm a dog. Stop minding on the remote.
Tafe University used to be free in Australia. Trumpet of Patriots will make it free again.
It's 100% of GDP.
Wow.
Almost 100%, not
Hey,
quite.
Trace, good to see you.
So again, but all of these economies are imploding now. All our Western economies. So obviously, what's happened is that the Americans have said, sorry, the game's up, and rightfully so, because now, and what's truly ironic for me here living in England is that it's a Labour government, a socialist government, who introduced the welfare state back in 1949. That now have that now sort of have the responsibility to tell the British people that the game is up. You know, so that's an interesting thing to watch, because you know this present government apparently is you know, they have the great socialist agenda. Now it's all that's completely in ruins. So now we're having to increase our defence spending. We raided the foreign aid budget to 2.7. Going up to 3% in 2029. That's the net. But of course, Marco Rubio has told the NATO that Europeans now have to, you know, sort of get their spending up to 5%. So this
deadline, was there a deadline on that, or any?
No.
Guys, this come up on my browser search yesterday. I swear I didn't look it up. It just showed up on its own. Watch this. Look at that. That showed up last night, and I didn't ask for it, but that's what showed up. Look.
This is disgusting. That's terrible. It's all your fault.
I didn't request that. It showed up, guys, I swear. Oh, now I've blown it. Where am I? There it is.
Don't use plastic anchors to fix things on the wall anymore. They're not very secure. Now, everyone uses a mini nail gun and no oil or electricity needed, making nailing easy and efficient. It can penetrate steel.
They say no. They say we realise it's not going to happen, you know, next year, but there has to be a credible path. So now now our government is cutting welfare payments, welfare budget.
Yeah, Trace, I've never looked up the Three Stooges before, but it showed up on last night's browse. So I had to give it a thumbs up to show you guys. They're still funny.
And so, because now they have to find the money to spend it on defence. And of course, you know, we now have the tariff war going on. So it really, and of course, from the European point of view, you know, so they're getting a little bit America's not being, it's unreliable. We can't rely on America anymore for our defense. We have to, we have to now buy European. So, of course, someone like President Macron is seeing this as a great opportunity, right, to bolster European defense, the defense industry. There is a need, I think, for European defense industry, because one of the things Europeans are crying out to the Americans is, well, hey, we buy 4 times more from America for our defense than we do from Europe. So if you're going to be so unreliable, we're now going to build up our own European defense industries. And there are big ones, BAE Systems here, you've got Thales in France, Leonardo in Italy. So there's that sort of dynamic going on with what's going on. But yeah, it's kind of, but you know what, they should have known this, because Trump was like this the first time round.
Yeah.
And now it's like, well, okay, you want, but the Europeans don't trust Putin at all, and I don't think anybody should. Their thing is,
Let's be honest, you can't trust any world leader. It's that simple.
he will come for more. At some stage, he will come for more. And so now the Europeans have to they have to catch up, and they have to catch up quickly to bridge the American gap in terms of armaments, of what the Europeans are capable of, what the Americans, the gaps that they fill. There's all talk of the umbrella, will that be removed? But apparently President Trump's, reaffirmed his commitment to NATO, but he's told the Europeans, pay up now. And now the Europeans are actually going to their people and saying, okay, the welfare game is over. It's interesting.
Diane, when you go to jail, it's called habeas corpus. And I think it's something to do with they actually want your body for the actual charge. Like, yeah, I'm not sure though.
I look at the history of this nation. Let me just boast on us a little bit here. We invented virtually everything, and it's kind of, I like to say to people,
They have habeas corpus in the psych wards as well. I done my fair share of psych wards once I turned Christian and I got attacked.
So you got a radio, you're welcome. You got a telephone, you're welcome. You got a television, you're welcome. You got a computer, you're welcome. You got, even the World Wide Web, right? We created that and gave it to the world for free. I don't know whether that's a good idea now. I think we should have put a bar on it, to say that if you're going to have a website, at least you have to have read a book or something from start to finish. But anyway, you're flying around in a jet engine, you're welcome. It's kind of, and when I look at us now, I mean, do you know? I don't know. Well, let me just say this: we have actually won more Nobel Prizes per capita than any other nation on earth. So America's won more Nobel Prizes, obviously, per capita. I mean, we're the most inventive nation in the history of the world. I say that with no apology. The electric motor, right? And like the 1900s is when the Nobel Prize came in, right? Mm-hmm. And so what about all the invention that was before that? The height of the British Empire, the height of the British industry. An electric motor empowers everything. Michael Faraday, you're welcome. Electromagnetism, Maxwell, you're welcome. All of that. And I was reading a report today. We have, Mondo, 1 in 4 young people are not in education, employment, or training in this country. They're all signed off on benefits because they all have mental health problems. 1 in 4 young people, right? I read a report today. There's a young lady. She earns £500,000 a year as a benefit influencer, right? In other words, she has 1 million followers. She's influencing people. She's kind of telling people how to milk the welfare system, the welfare state, right? This is her ambition. She says, I have no ambition to get a job. She's 31.
This is her job.
Wow.
This is her job. How to milk the system. And you have 1 million people following her, trying to find out how to milk the system. So this part, how have the mighty fallen, right? How has the mighty fallen? I like to say, I boast about this nation for what we have.
Diane, with prophecy with Stan, Do you remember that Deirdre Doody, however you say his name? He said the Civil War will start in America with the left demanding their social rights, and now we've got it happening. It's the whole Democrats against the Republicans, and the Democrats have lost all their funding because of Doge, and they're going right off their heads about it. And it looks like that Dimitri Didymu looks like he might have been right.
Achieved in the centuries past. So what we have now become, and what the generation that is now coming forth is more interested. The younger people are more interested in being influencers or being welfare recipients than being drivers of industry by being inventors. You know what I mean? That the great mantle that rests upon this nation of invention. So anyway, that's my little post about this country. But that's kind of where we sort of in terms of where the Europeans now realize they've now really got to catch up, because the Americans are saying, sorry, we can't afford it. You want to keep the Russians at bay, you want to keep Putin out, then you're going to have to stump up the money and change Europe somehow is going to have to move from a welfare state system to, Germany now is talking about conscription. Poland now wants to have massive conscription. Germany wants to reintroduce conscription. They're amending their constitution. The money that is being bandied about, the European Union, they're going to, I think, 125 billion euros that they're raising for European defence. But that's in addition to Germany's already spent an additional 80 billion that is put to defence. So there's a lot of money involved here. Yeah, and so I think it's going to rejuvenate European industry, certainly the defence industry. So that's kind of. But yeah, but just to get back to that thing about the Americans are unreliable, I say, well, from the American point of view, Europe's been unreliable since the time of Eisenhower.
Yeah,
an unreliable ally.
This is a good opportunity to share with the audience that we're going to be coming back to Europe, Europe 3.0, and that'll be with Billy Crone and Ken Michael, myself, Josh Schwartz, and maybe a couple others. But that's going to be August 30th, and then we'll be in Oxford, England, and then we're going to be heading over to Norway after that, and in Germany. And so if people get information about that, propswatchers.com, and just go to the events tab. Scroll down, and you can see the specific details. So we're going to be there. I mean, let's kind of wrap this in a little bow here. This at least thoughts on it. All the things that are happening now, let's say in the past couple months, under Trump, and maybe even a little bit under his first administration.
Wow.
How does this contribute? And nobody's a prophet necessarily in that sense, but how does this contribute to the overall end time scenario as it relates to Europe? I think if we think, and not everybody agrees, but if we just assume for a moment that the revived Roman Empire, Daniel chapter 2, is going to be Europe central, Mediterranean based, so to speak, like the original Roman Empire was, and no doubt Europe's going to be involved in this. How do you think this is contributing? Because there's two things here. One is, as you mentioned, you have all these nation states that are approaching things that themselves through their own GDP, like you said, Poland and others. But then you have the European Union itself, which is in one sense a separate entity, or at least a transcendent entity, managing their own level of expenditures. And then you have another transcendent is NATO. So is this going to, within 5 years, let's say, is Europe going to be potentially a powerhouse, which will then contribute to the coming, center of the beast system? I mean, what's your thoughts on that? How do you think it through?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't thought that much through on that one. I think, look, the world is heading for war, right? So it's on the road to war. We know that. There will come a time where people say peace, peace. But I think Europe is going to have to completely change its outlook. And for that, it's going to have to tell its citizens that
Europe's going Muslim, mate. This is wishful thinking.
That, like I say, the party's over.
Gravy train's over, yeah.
The gravy train is over. So we're going to have to begin to fund our own defence. I mean, you know, if you want to make some money now, I suppose putting some money into European defence industries, Rolls-Royce or, you know, BAE Systems. I'm not advising that. I'm looking at how all the stocks you know, are rising on these defence industries. So I think certainly that is going to increase. Where it's going to end up in, they actually said that for you know, the Europeans, or even like for the UK, to sort of to plug the gaps that the Americans provide for its defence capabilities, it's going to take 10 years. You know, yeah, about you know, forget 5% for 10 years. So of course, so to do that, it's not like a time of war. You're restructuring your economy, right, in this preparation for war. So so it's going to be interesting, Monmouth, to see how that plays out, and different you know, European partners in terms of how they see it. You know, there was talk of the Americans sort of abrogating their command of NATO, because they've always had the Supreme Allied Commander, and then the deputy is usually always going to a British commander. That's just how it's always worked out. But there was talk, I don't know what is happening, but there was talk that the Americans would say, okay, we're not going to have
Hey, Shawnee, good to see
the
you.
Allied Supreme Commander. But if that ever happens, that really is a case of America saying, you've got to do this yourself, because we're concentrating on China, and you know, there's a lot of stuff going on, isn't there? You know, across the world, and it's like countries like Australia.
Shawnee, check this out. It showed up on my stream last night, on my browser last night. Three Stooges, look.
We can see more of the
So we
world
get
than
an
ever. With Bridgestone Tech Check, you see what needs repairing now and what can wait, so you can go with confidence. Bridgestone Select Tyre and Auto.
You could win this $10.2 million townhouse complex, including $1 million in gold.
It's all your fault, Puddinhead. We hadn't listened to you. You had it all figured out. We catch our own fish and it don't cost us nothing. And you nearly took...
Shawnee, that showed up on my browser last night. I didn't request it or anything. I didn't put anything about Three Stooges anywhere, and that showed up last night. I think there's no coincidences with God.
They say no. They say we realise it's not going to happen, you know, next year, but there has to be a credible path. So now now our government is cutting welfare payments, welfare budgets, and so because now they have to find the money to spend it on defence. And of course, you know, we now have the tariff war going on. So it really, and of course, from the European point of view, you know, so they're getting a little bit, you know, America's not being, you know, it's unreliable. We can't rely on America anymore for our defence. We have to, you know, we have to now buy European. So of course, someone like President Macron is seeing this as a great opportunity, right, to bolster European defence. The defence industry. There is a need.
Yeah,
I think,
no coincidences, exactly.
Because one of the things Europeans are pointing out to the Americans is, well, hey, we buy 4 times more from America for our defence than we do from Europe. So if you're going to be so unreliable,
But Shawnee, it is crazy. Last night, Three Stooges just show up. I couldn't believe it when it happened, but that's how God works with me. He shows me things like that.
now going to build up our own European defence industries. And there are big ones, BAE Systems here, you've got Thales in France, Leonardo in Italy. So there's that sort of dynamic going on with what's going on. But yeah, it's kind of, but you know what, they should have known this, because Trump was like this the first time round, and now it's like, well, okay, you want the Europeans don't trust Putin at all, and I don't think anybody should. You know, their thing is he will come for more. At some stage, he will come for more, and so now the Europeans have to catch up, and they have to catch up quickly. to bridge the American gap in terms of armaments, or what the Europeans are capable of, what the Americans, what the gaps that they fill. There's all talk of the nuclear, the umbrella, will that be removed? But apparently President Trump's, reaffirmed his commitment to NATO, but he's told the Europeans, pay up now. It's really, and now the Europeans are actually going to their people and saying, okay, the welfare game is over. It's interesting, Mondo. I look at the history of this nation. Let me just boast on us a little bit here. We invented virtually everything, and it's kind of, I like to say to people, you got a radio, you're welcome. You got a telephone, you're welcome. You got a television, you're welcome. You got a computer, you're welcome. You got, even the World Wide Web, right? We created that and gave it to the world for free. I don't know whether that's a good idea now. I think we should have put a bar on it, to say that if you're going to have a website, at least you have to have read a book or something from start to finish. But anyway, you're flying around in a jet engine, you're welcome. It's kind of, and when I look at us now, I mean, do you know? I don't know. Well, let me just say this: we have actually won more Nobel Prizes per capita than any other nation on earth. So America's won more Nobel Prizes, obviously, per capita. I mean,
Israel had to be second on that, Nobel Prizes.
We're the most inventive nation in the history of the world. I say that with no apology. The electric motor, right? And like the 1900s is when the Nobel Prize came in, right? Mm-hmm. And so what about all the invention that was before that? The height of the British Empire, the height of British industry. An electric motor empowers everything. Michael Faraday, you're welcome. Electromagnetism, Maxwell, you're welcome. All of that. And I was reading a report today. So we have, Mondo, 1 in 4 young people are not in education, employment, or training in this country.
No, I just showed Sean your Three Stooges video.
Signed off on benefits.
That's why she wrote no coincidences.
Mental health problems. 1 in 4 young people, right? I read a report today. There's a young lady. She has £500,000 a year as a benefit influencer, right? In other words, she has 1 million followers. She's influencing people. She's kind of telling people how to milk the welfare system, the welfare state, right? This is her ambition. She says, I have no ambition to get a job. She's 31.
This is her job.
This is her job. How to milk the system. And you have 1 million people following her, trying to find out how to milk the system. So this part, and how have the mighty fallen, right? How has the mighty fallen? I like I say, I boast about this nation for what we have achieved in the centuries past. So what we have now become, and what the generation that is now coming forth is more interested. The younger people are more interested in being influencers or being welfare recipients than being drivers of industry, by being inventors. You know what I mean? The great mantle that rests upon this nation of invention. So anyway, that's my little boast about this country. But that's kind of where we sort of, in terms of where the Europeans now realize they've now really got to catch up, because the Americans are saying, sorry, we can't afford it. You want to keep the Russians at bay, you want to keep Putin out, then you're going to have to stump up the money and change Europe is somehow is going to have to move from a welfare state system to, Germany now is talking about conscription. Poland now wants to have massive conscription. Germany wants to reintroduce conscription. They're amending their constitution. The money that is being bandied about, the European Union, they're going to, I think, 125 billion euros that they're raising for European defence. But that's in addition to Europe. Germany's already spent an additional 80 billion that is put to defence. So there's a lot of money involved here. Yeah, and so I think it's going to rejuvenate European industry, certainly the defence industry. So that's kind of But yeah, but just to get back to that thing about the Americans are unreliable, I say, well, from the American point of view, Europe's been unreliable since the time of Eisenhower,
Yeah,
an
I mean,
unreliable ally.
this is a good opportunity to share with the audience that we're going to be coming back to Europe, Europe 3.0, and that'll be with Billy Crone and Ken Michael, myself, Josh Schwartz, and maybe a couple others. But that's going to be August 30th, and then we'll be in Oxford, England, and then we're going to be heading over to Norway after that, and then Germany. And so if people get information about that, propswatchers.com, and just go to the events tab, scroll down, you can see the specific details. So we're going to be there. I mean, when you let's kind of wrap this in a little bow here, this at least thoughts on it. All the things that are happening now, let's say in the past couple months, under Trump, and maybe even a little bit under his first administration, how does this contribute? And nobody's a prophet necessarily in that sense, but how does this contribute to the overall end time scenario as it relates to Europe? I think if we think, and not everybody agrees, but if we just assume for a moment that the revived Roman Empire, Daniel chapter 2, is going to be Europe central, Mediterranean based, so to speak, like the original Roman Empire was, and no doubt Europe's going to be involved in this. How do you think this is contributing? Because there's two things here. One is, as you mentioned, you have all these nation states that are approaching things that
Oh,
themselves
stay up or
through their
down,
own
dude.
GDP,
Come on.
like you said, Poland and others. But then you have the European Union itself, which is in one sense a separate entity, or at least a transcendent entity, managing their own
Wow,
level
guy.
of expenditures. And then you have another transcendent is NATO. So is this going to, within 5 years, let's say, is Europe going to be potentially a powerhouse, which will then contribute to the coming, center of the beast system? I mean, what's your thoughts on that? How do you think it through?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't thought that much still on that one. I think, look, the world is heading for war, right? So it's on the road to war. We know that. There will come a time where people say peace, peace. But I think Europe is going to have to completely change its outlook, and for that, it's going to have to tell its citizens that like I say, the party's over.
Gravy train's over, yeah.
The gravy train is over. So we're going to have to begin to fund our own defense. I mean, if you want to make some money now, I suppose putting some money into European defense industries, Rolls-Royce or BAE Systems. I'm not advising that. I'm looking at how all the stocks are rising on these defense industries. So I think certainly that is going to increase. Where it's going to end up in, they actually said that for the Europeans, or even like for the UK, to sort of to plug the gaps that the Americans provide for its defense capabilities, it's going to take 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah, forget 5% for 10 years. Of course, so to do that, it's not like a time of war. You're restructuring your economy, right, in this preparation for war. So it's going to be interesting, to see how that plays out, and different, European partners in terms of how they see it. There was talk of the Americans sort of abrogating their commander NATO, because they've always had the supreme allied commander, and then the deputy is usually always going to a British commander. That's just how it's always worked out. But there was talk, I don't know what is happening, but there was talk that the Americans would say, okay, we're not going to have, the allied supreme commander. But if that ever happens, that really is the case of America saying, you've got to do this yourself, because we're concentrating on China, and
Diane, for the past 3 days, it's been pelting down, and there's literally, it's just torrential rain, and it's been like that for 3 days. I live near a creek, so hopefully it won't overflow.
There's a lot of stuff going on, isn't there? Across the world. And it's like countries like Australia. So the Chinese Navy just did a circuit of Australia. So the Australians are now saying, well, what have we got to do as a Western nation to sort of protect ourselves against Chinese aggression? So there's massive amounts of things going on. And of course, will the Iranians, will Iran be struck with their nuclear sites? Who knows? Apparently, I read today the Houthis, the Iranians have abandoned the Houthis now because the game is up for them. So just a lot going on, Mondo. I think it would be a bit foolish to try and predict what is actually, what's going to be, the outcome of all this. Other than I think, we just have to be aware that
Yeah, pay to click. The Nazi scientists, Diane.
the end is upon
They
us.
brought back after World War
I mean,
II.
we saw.
Hey, Vance, good to see you, bro.
Of Syria, the new, HST, president, he's going to be meeting with Trump in Saudi Arabia, and so that's a big deal. And in one sense, and then of course, for those that have been watching, for 20, 30 years, when you see aircraft carrier group after aircraft carrier group making their way across the world to the Middle East, that's not done just to waste gasoline or fuel or nuclear energy or whatever. And then we've seen 7, B-2 bombers, as a B-1 Lancer bomber heading over to Diego Garcia. You guys own that island. And
well, at the moment, we signed it off. Apparently, Trump has said, yeah, you can give it away, you can give it back to Mauritius, and we go to pay Mauritius and it's up front £9 million pounds a year. We don't have the money for that. We've got to pay Mauritius to give the island because apparently it belongs to them, because the UN court has decided, the International Court of Justice decided it belongs to them. Which was judged by a Chinese official. Can you imagine a Chinese official? Of course, our Prime Minister is very much is a lawyer, so there's the accusation that that they're more in tune with dealing with looking good on the international stage than actual strategic interest, that sort of thing. Anyway, but yeah, so it's. Yeah, another thing to
So so we have this buildup that's happening right now in front of our eyes, and Trump has been, I'll say it this way: what we know about Trump is that when he says something, a lot of times it can be inflammatory or it's meant to stir the pot. That's all true, but also he does follow through on what he says, and so he said basically to Iran, it's either you're going to give it up. You're going to give up your nuclear thing, or we're going to bomb you. So that's it. I mean, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. New sheriff in town. And so, in fact, I think what you're seeing with the Iranians with the Houthis, same thing. We've been bombing the Houthis, I think justifiably so, because of their disruption of everybody there, total terrorism in the Straits. But they...
Amen, Voss.
Amen, bro. Wall. Like, wow, they're bombing them. They're building up. They cannot. And I saw this too in another article, that what Iran is worried about more than a United States attack is that would coincide with a domestic rebellion of an overthrow, because it hasn't been their real, their currency is
Diane, he looks like an illegal immigrant.
Inflation is 40% in the past few months. And so what they can't do is have instability, of course, with a U.S. attack. But what they were saying was that if you look at the surrounding countries, all these border skirmishes, they cannot handle all of that at once and then have an internal rebellion by the people. And so they are very, very nervous about their regime getting overthrown simply by the weight of all these things converging at once. So that's a big deal. We know they're liars, honestly, about their nuclear program. And as we've seen with the JCPOA, going all the way back to 2015. So, where's this heading? The next few months are going to be quite interesting, because one of the things that helps us is Trump also has given deadlines.
Me, come
Like, you know,
on.
This is the deadline.
Come
We
on.
better have the answer by this.
Go away then.
So, thoughts on that?
Well, again, I mean, I think you have to be more than prophet to prophesy about what's going on in the Middle East, right? Because it's so inflammatory. You know, will the Ayatollahs ever give up to Iran? I'm not sure that they ever would. So maybe what you're saying is correct, that maybe they are just they're cutting their losses with Hezbollah and all their proxies to look after at home. But you know, you're aware the threat was if the Americans come up to you know, threaten to bomb, you know, bomb nuclear sites, then we will do a preemptive strike, bomb Diego Garcia, which then from the UK standpoint is actually, that might not be a bad idea, because the Mauritians there, they say we don't want the island anymore. You know, so yeah, it's a maze. I think the Middle East. You know, I think we can only sort of look at that through a prophetic lens of where it's going, rather than saying, you know, this is going to happen or that's going to happen. It's you know, it's more, I think, as well, Mondo, about, you know, what's happening within our own civilization, you know, and our Western civilization, because I think there's an interesting narrative going on there as well.
You know, on that's a good segue, because to help us understand, you know, let me give just a brief comment here, in that in America, we have the Bill of Rights. You know, we have the freedom of speech, freedom of religion enshrined, you know, in the First Amendment, the freedom to gather peacefully. Those rights are only for citizens. Okay, so if you're a foreigner here and you have a visa, those aren't guaranteed for you at all. In fact, you know, we reserve the right to kick you out if we don't like what you say. So, you know, we don't have to respect. They don't come in with the same rights because they're not citizens. And so if they say these things, or if they're pro-Hamas or anti-this, or it's just something we simply don't like, anti-American, we can revoke it, and that doesn't violate any of our freedoms or enshrined in the Constitution. So that's the case here. But in my own thinking as well, I've tended to think in terms of what you said, Western civilization, that, well, we got freedom of speech here. That's not just an American thing. That's a Western civilization thing, right? I mean, isn't that all Europe's that way? And so, which is wrong thinking. So, you know, talk about what truly freedom of speech means for you in England or in the UK in general, and how that maybe contrasts with how it might be for us. Because I think we might assume that you guys have the same levels, but yet we're seeing people arrested for thinking and praying and, you know, and silently doing this, and we're like, what? Or making a post on Facebook, and we're like, whoa. Help the American understand the differences.
Okay. Well, let me just go back to some history. I think there's always historical context is good. So I was listening to a prominent historian, and this is just his field. And I think from an American, Western civilization is effectively English civilization. So all the concepts that, as an American, that you believe in, right? So limited government, representative government, independent judiciary, trial by jury, free markets, free press, freedom of worship, of assembly, freedom of speech, etc., right to protest, capitalism, all that began here. It's all this was the birthplace of all of that. So which is why some historians will say when that the American, let's say the American Revolution, the Revolutionary War, the war there was actually England's second civil war or third civil war, depending how many what we have here. No, it was a continuation of British English ideas, particularly, which are fought out in the New World, right? So the idea that the Englishman is a free person was the very fuel
Bas, this is interesting. I don't know why you're having a problem with it.
of the colonists, sort of their grievances, right? Because their rights as free Englishmen were being violated. Okay, so you know, we are your mother,
These guys are very biased. Is that what you're saying?
we are your father. so from that point of view, it's a continuation. What you have there in America is a continuation of these freedoms. But what we are seeing certainly is a particular erosion. And now, of course, we've gone at this different ways in our nation. So we don't have a separation of powers like you do, but we have the balance of powers within our parliamentary system, right? So everything that a case in point that we can mention about what the Americans, the State Department picked up on about this person who was caught praying within the exclusion zone of an abortion clinic. So that was a parliamentary motion passed. Some people felt it was too onerous, and then of course then there is this idea of, you know, where does freedom of speech end? Where does it begin? Because we all put limits on freedom of speech.
I thought you were joking, Di, because I don't know what's the objection here.
My nation, your nation, there has to be limits on freedom of speech. So that was a parliamentary bill that was passed. So the person who was doing that was effectively breaking the law. Now, some people can say the law is it wasn't a good law, and you do have the
Well, did they give Hamas a good rap? Did they?
Life people who were kind of applauding the Americans for bringing this up, because here in the UK, because we're more secular, we don't have such a pro-life lobby like you do in the States, and so I don't think it would the abortion laws would never be overturned here. All we can expect, I think, best is for a reduction in the weeks of abortion. So that was kind of what's playing out there. So this person was in the 150-meter exclusion zone, right? So effectively, that's why the police were arrested, because they don't want to, people going to access healthcare, that's what they call it, don't want them to feel intimidated or feel, pressured or feel distressed or anything like that. Of course, the pro-life people, which I am one, would say, well, what about the young person in the womb? Do they not feel distressed by the actions you're going to take? So anyway, so this is kind of the balance, and some people thought the balance was too far, for the pro-choice camp, because we did have people protesting outside abortion clinics, etc., like what's going on in America. So there's that argument going on. There's the other argument about. I mean, we do have. I mean, it depends what side, of course, you're on, right? So the protests in London, like last year with Hamas and from the river to the sea, and the protest is full on there.
Okay,
there's an interesting case here about just happened a couple of days ago, Mondo, was the police raided a Quaker meeting house, to arrest a group of activists. Now, they weren't Quaker activists; they were in the Quaker house, but just go into the place to arrest. And the activist, it's like a young people's activist group, and we had like the Stop Oil activists. And last year, who were bringing London to a standstill. And this is what they were planning to do again, was to bring London to a standstill. So we do have the right to protest, but all of that. And so the police went in. And of course, now this has thrown up a whole constitutional problem that, well, the freedom of religion, it's in a place of religious. The Quakers are all up in arms about this. That's a bit of an oxymoron, because the Quakers are never up in arms, right? Because they're peace-nicked. So, you come into a place of worship that's never happened, etc. And so where do you draw the line? So some of us would say, well, hey, nip it in the bud. We don't want people blocking, stopping economic activity because of their activism. But then there's another incident, which is kind of like moved on to the other edge, where a couple, a husband and wife, disagreed with an appointment at a school, and they of the head, and they got into a bit of a slanging match on a WhatsApp group, and the school was saying they were being, sort of intimidating, and they were being so disunity and what have you. And they approached the police, and the police said, well, here's what you should do. So they called the police to arrested them in front of their 6-year-old girl. Six cops turned up at the house. They were arrested for 11 hours, right? And eventually the cop says, there's nothing to answer here for, I should never have gone to the police. So the police advised the school to take this course in action to arrest. And the police said, well, there was no case to answer for, it should never gone to. So this is kind of what, but this is where we're at, I think, with free speech, because this is, the school thinks now this is the way you should deal with, difficult parents who are sort of. So talk about who's intimidating who now. Yeah, who's intimidating who? But I think as I thought about this, I think it's the internet which has really launched this dilemma of the free speech dilemma in our societies, because we're speaking before again about the I think it's the American administration now is revoking visas of students who are either pro-Palestine or pro-Hamas. So where's the freedom of speech there? So again, it's almost like how do you navigate this whole idea of freedom of speech? And of course, what a lot of people, get back to the idea of Western civilization. There's a lot of voices now, I think, I don't know if you agree with me on this, but there's a lot of voices now talking about, the saving of Western civilization. And suddenly Christianity now is all popular again, right? The Judeo-Christian civilization, this is what we have to say. But one thing I noticed, Mondo, so you get people like Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray, and a lot of voices. We just had he did an art conference here, the Alliance of Responsible Citizenship in London, and £1,400 a pop to attend. Wow. I know, Prophecy Watchers, you're cheap. And I noticed this trend, this conversation about now suddenly Judeo-Christian civilization. This is what we have to say. It's popular now to be Christian. But of course, I noticed that none of them actually want to go to church. None of them want to repent for their sins. None of them actually, do you understand? So again, it's this idea of using the argument because we feel now our civilization is under threat. But what civilization is under threat exactly? Your thoughts. Have some more on that.
This goes back to as you know, I'm a big fan of C.S. Lewis, and I run a study guide on the Screwtape Letters. But the Screwtape Letters is one of his earliest books. Written basically around 1941. Maybe started writing it a little bit earlier, and in the midst of what we understand. But he described how even back then there was a goal to use Christianity use it as a launching point to establish other ends. And so in this sense, people, like you just said, that's what I see is when you think about the Judeo-Christian West, so to speak, well, that's a far different cry than a West, which is going to use Judeo-Christianity to further its own, existence. Because what you said is exactly right. And we see this in America too, that you have maybe a lack of discernment for a political movement or a Christian movement, when in reality, making America great again, it's a political movement, obviously. Okay, no one should apologize for that. But there's no doubt that that movement is using Christianity for its benefit. And I'm not saying there's not genuine Christians in the movement, because there is. But at the end of the day, this is the question, whether it's saving Western civilization, or in this sense, making America great, or making Western civilization great again. Okay, how do we define great? In the Bible, it's defined by repentance. It's defined by a pursuit of forgiveness and the Spirit, walking in the Spirit, putting God first, but ultimately holiness and sin, right? And so I think what we've seen is the abuse or the leveraging of Christianity to help those ends. Because again, if you ask anybody in that movement, they would hope, oh well, greatness again is Trump defining. This isn't a criticism of Trump necessarily. It's just, how is he defining great? Well, I think he's defining it as energy independence, economic prosperity, the Constitution itself being honored. Well, those are all wonderful things, but that's not the same as, again, all those things can be true, and yet America can be filled with unregenerate sinners who have no desire to repent before a holy God as it relates to the gospel. So again, as long as we keep that level up,
That's actually the whole world at the moment, not just America.
Of distinction, that whether it's saving Western civilization from what is, this isn't a spiritual salvation, it's a political salvation. But and again, ultimately, what do we know? Well, I'd rather have an economic America than a poverty. I'd rather have freedoms that, of course, because as we know, that allows for freedom of presenting the gospel versus the previous 4 years where we had a lot of censorship. So that's how I would weigh into it in the same thing.
Yeah.
How are we defining that?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because very often what we're doing is we're defining it as the barbarians are at the gate. Okay, so Rome, and obviously the barbarians, and I use that term just as an expression, right? I'm not just calling people barbarians, but that expression of barbarians at the gate, we use that,
No way.
The migrations that are coming in, bringing in different
Diane, Fox News have been cracking jokes about Michelle being a guy.
ideologies, Islam or whatever, bringing all that in, which are not compatible with Western values. But then you question, well, now, what are Western values? It's really interesting, because all the names that I mentioned a couple there, the only one that I know is actually a believer, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She was actually I think she was Somalian. She was raised a Muslim. She then became an atheist, hung around with Richard Dawkins and his ilk. And then in recent years has literally become a Christian. I think a fighter, believer. So her take, of course, is the idea of the barbarians at the gate, because she's raised in a Islamic culture, so she knows what that culture does. Fair enough. But what about the barbarians within, right? So yes, the idea of what exactly are we trying to save here? What are we trying to make great? Because I was listening to, okay, so now some years back, I don't know if it's still the case, but I'm assuming it is. Let's just assume it is. That the greatest purveyor of pornography in the world is the United States of America.
Yes.
Like, even if you didn't know Michelle's a guy, you wouldn't go for her because her face is so hard. It's not a woman's face. There's no compassion or softness in it like women have. It just looks grotesque. Literally, it looks grotesque.
Still true, yes.
But you follow what I'm saying? So, this is freedom of expression. This is freedom of, this is what we're trying to say. This Western civilization. And from where I am, Western civilization is completely bankrupt now. I didn't even know. I was listening to a Dennis Prager. You know Dennis Prager? I'm going to mention some names. So very conservative, and there is now apparently there is child AI pornography apparently.
Wow.
Right? Okay, so real children are not involved. But there was a conversation.
Wow, they turned A on the child porn. Wow.
I listened to it yesterday, and he was saying in Judaism, there is no sin of intent. There is no sin of the heart, like in Christianity, where Jesus said, if you committed adultery in your heart. So a man can have whatever fantasies he wants. We don't condemn that. We have nothing to do with that. And the guy he was talking with said, well, yeah, but you know, the fact that you're entertaining it, not with real children, but with virtual children, is evil. No, we don't call that evil. So I don't know what.
Okay, a guy went to Japan and got a child sex doll and tried to get it through the airport, and he got charged as though it was a real kid. He got all the charges you get it as a real kid, but that's a thing, guys. They get child dolls. They can do that with. That's a thing.
They're trying to defend, and so and then you have the other lady. You'll know who I'm talking about. The Christ is King. That's her thing about Christ is King. And she's conservative. She's a Catholic now, but she's I mean, I've listened to her. She's talking about.
Shawnee, she'll start doing a Trump comb over soon.
Yeah, adding your voice to people like Andrew Tate. The vilest of he's not a. We're all the vilest of sinners. Don't get me wrong, but in terms of he's in the news again now for his, what he was going on with his ex-girlfriend. She's pressing charges now. So in other words, what are we trying to save? What are we trying to make great again? Or are we actually saying, this thing's over? This thing is as bankrupt as it can be. The window that we have left, as much as we've had, the civilized, and I'm a fan of America, right? That Jesus isn't going to put up with this anymore. It's just God isn't going to put up with it anymore. So
Shawnee, Trump's hair has got about 3 different directions combed into it. It's a classic.
This great civilization, we could say Western civilization is the greatest civilization that has arisen on Earth. But I think we have to realize that it's got to come to an end because the perversion is getting greater.
Well, let me ask you this, because we think about these sins of the heart. So so maybe there's no children being molested, which we know that's not true. That's certainly, it still exists. But like legitimizing not only abortion as a freedom, legitimizing the freedom to be perverted in your own mind through AI or through the coming doll revolution.
Hey Diane, hasn't Joe Rogan come on board with the Bible and all that now? Apparently 10 years ago he was making fun of us, and now he sticks up for us and it's part of the deal. Big turnaround.
Robotic doll and women and all. I mean, having your own, wife. So we have this very, very delusional aspect of what is great. But if you look back, think about, I'll ask you this, the French Revolution, is that Western civilization? I mean, pretty atheistic, right? And
the Masonic order done the French Revolution. Was the Masons behind it?
That's still considered a foundation of what Western civilization needs to be saved. I mean, what do you think about that?
No, I mean, as an Englishman, of course, I'm not. Of course, I carry no truck with the French Revolution. But now here's something interesting that we go back. So Thomas Paine was an atheist, right? Said derogatory things about God. So Thomas Paine it says without the sword of Washington, without the pen of Paine, the sword of Washington would be wielded in vain. So Thomas Paine was actually the herald, as it were, for the colonists in their separatist movement against the crown. You know what I figured out, Mondo? We all live in a contradiction. We all live in I call it the great contradiction. And my thing is, where am I in this great contradiction in my own life? So again, I'll come back to this, but again, the whole the idea of Christ is King, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. But I hope we realize that as believers, Mondo, we gave up that freedom. when we became followers of Jesus, or Jesus used his freedom, I only say those things I hear my Father say, I speak those things I see, I do those things I hear and see him do, that we commit to saying what he says, that our words are seasoned with grace and with all of, kindness. And that I just, you watch, even with your previous president, Mondo, you watch the vitriol from Christians directed against President Biden, and you're thinking, okay, but like I said, you can get caught up in a movement, the MAGA movement, let's say, but actually, if Christ is king over this, then you bring this to bear, to speak grace. It doesn't mean you can't dissent, doesn't mean that, but it means every word that you say is measured. You can't throw yourself into the free speech free for all that seems to be going on about we want the right to express ourselves any way we want to, because we gave up that right to express ourselves any way we want to. Hopefully we did. Yeah. So so what's interesting, so Paine, so he manages to foment the American Revolution, but the Americans really never. Again, what the historian was listening to, it was only half a revolution, because all the Americans did was they took the system of governance, commons, lords, crown, and just created a tripart system and dressed it up in Roman dress. It was only ever really half a revolution. The French Revolution, they got away with all of it. They and of course it was Thomas Paine then. He was expelled for treason here. That he died in Paris in the end, I think, alone. And even the Americans reject. He couldn't find any.
He couldn't wait to write it.
Even though he was kind of the voice behind the American Revolution, he couldn't find any compassion. So many years on, because he then advocated for the French Revolution, the overthrow of the monarchy, the overthrow of the crown. And interesting, you feel like Edmund Burke, who was more opponents in America, railed against Thomas Paine. So what I'm trying to say with all that, I don't know why we go on to that, but it's all a bit deeper than people think, and we're living in this great contradiction. Yeah, getting back to this idea of Western civilization. So okay, get on to a favorite topic we haven't really spoken about, but L.A. Marzulli. ETs, right, and the whole extraterrestrial thing which is going on, and the hybrid one. Well, it's not the Muslims who are doing that. If I'm saying it's quite possibly the American military that's doing, and I've got a different take on that from what the traditional line is. So if all these threats are emerging, it's not just the barbarians at the gates, it's the barbarians within the gates as well, our own civilization. And so this idea, and I'm glad you brought up Lewis. I didn't know he said that. I'm not a Lewis reader, so you are. So the idea that they would use Christianity to sort of
further
say, to push an agenda. And like somebody says, you're complaining about Islam and the Muslims or what have you. So I see you all in church on Sunday there, but they're not. And certainly not here, they're not. There's more people in church in your country than there are in mine. Do you want to say anything?
No, I would say that this whole idea, we have to be careful, because we can be unaware. I have it in my brain because I'm seeing it again in Lewis's writings, and it was happening back then. But it happened.
And Diane, the problem is Trump likes that worship. I saw a guy in Africa set up a shrine to Trump, and he bragged about it. He actually likes that.
Happens, you can use Christianity for any sort of cause, and that's what I'm seeing here. Is there is an enthusiasm for economic prosperity and freedom of speech, especially because what we saw during the COVID time, lockdowns and freedom, liberties being removed, and certainly censorship with all in social media, etc. So there's no doubt I'm rejoicing in many of the things that are being done at the moment, and trying also to keep in mind that God is called, Jesus' kingdom is not MAGA. Okay, it extends, transcends beyond all that. We always have to make that, keep that in our minds, that at the end of the day, no matter what, we're called to preach the gospel. And again, when we think about that, again, greatness to God is defined as the gospel. Jesus died for sinners. He was.
Diane, I've also heard him call himself the chosen. I've heard him call himself the chosen.
Buried. He was raised the third day to save sinners. That the gospel will go out and repentance and faith will be preached for the forgiveness of sins. So that is the ultimate message that as Christians we have. And so we have to be careful that when we look at any movements in our own minds too, are we enjoying this? Are we getting sucked into our energies being given to support a movement that isn't necessarily, it's not overtly Christian because it's not defining greatness as sin. So
Yeah,
that's the distinction. And so I think for us, as we're, I guess we can kind of wrap it up here, but as we come to a close, as you're looking out, you're watching all this, any final thoughts in this whole discussion?
Well, I think we have to realize the sands of time are running out. I know like President Trump talked about a new golden age of America. Well, for an age, you need some years. I think we don't have to, considerable years of an age. But what I would say, listen, the reason in my nation that we gave birth to the Industrial Revolution and gave birth to the modern world and all of that, and all, it's because we were the greatest Protestant missionary sending nation on earth at the time. So there is a connection there, right? And then of course that baton has passed to you guys now, so you picked up the mantle, and you're now the greatest economic and military power on earth, like we were, so all this stuff has to come to an end. We can't be drawn into stuff. And I was listening to a podcast. I've only got a couple of minutes, Armando, but this is really interesting because the historians were saying that the first city ever, the first city in world history is a city called Uruk. It was raised. I mean, I don't know all these notes. I was hoping we could talk about Uruk. The whole idea of Uruk 5,000 years ago was there had these two great temples, of Eanna, the House of Heaven. Maybe we should talk about this another time. Maybe we can have a second part of this conversation. How about that?
Yeah,
but it's the idea that what began in Uruk has to come to an end, and it comes to an end there in the book of Revelation, because Uruk, of course, from the biblical narrative, is a city founded by Nimrod, and of course, his was the city of Babylon, and they left off building the city, so he goes to build these other cities. But Uruk is an amazing, from a historical, archaeological point of view. If you listen to that podcast, I think you'll find it really interesting. But again, I think we have to be aware that, what began all those years ago, that the cities that began in the sands of the mud flats of Mesopotamia in 5000 BC.
He did, didn't he, Shawnee?
Now reaching the end of this iteration of human civilization, and our nations are going to be judged, and that great prophecy in Micah and Isaiah, where he will judge amongst the nations and he will solve disputes amongst the nations. They will learn war no more. This is really what we have to look for, and set our hopes on. And so in this final great push, whatever this window is, Mondo, of some years, and I actually believe there will be we have to have some sort of revival. Some people don't believe that. I think we have a window of revival, of renewal, of picking up the remnant, and where Jesus will then come to establish his rule and reign on earth. And we won't have all of this mixture. We won't have this good with the bad.
Yeah.
We will truly have a Christian, messianic, Judeo-Christian civilization in its truest form. Is it G.K. Chesterton who said that,
I wonder if Trump will expose Michelle.
it's not that Christianity hasn't been tried, It's that it hasn't succeeded. It's that it hasn't been tried. True Christian civilization. So maybe that's a positive note to end our discussion on.
Because that really is the key, is that all of us look forward to the Lord's return, where he not only will have the wisdom, the character, the love, the righteousness for sure, but he'll have the power to institute and rule with the rod of iron. I mean, that's really the goal, and that's going to be the true golden kingdom age. But even there, we'll see that sin is still hanging out in the periphery, and that'll one day be rectified. Graham, as always, great talking to you. Great, and we look forward to seeing you here in 6 months or so for sure. And we'll be back for another podcast. But just want to remind everybody again, we're going to be going to England, Norway, and Germany. If you want information on that, go to prophecywatchers.com and just look at the events tab. Scroll down, you can see.
Okay.
Internet.
Mike, when we got in the Civil War and there was so much money spent, they instituted a temporary income
Shawnee, I don't want to play that Obama one, just in case it brings heat on me.
tax. And so that income tax, temporary tax that was there, it was temporary, got them to the war, then they got away from it.
Tariffs are the big hot topic right now. Tariffs or no tariff?
There's two ways to use tariffs. One is you can use it as a negotiating tool, and the other is you can use it as long-term economic policy. Now, I'll point out that at the time of the Founding Fathers, virtually 100% of all federal funds came in off tariffs. They used tariffs. George Washington imposed a 5% tariff on all products. That's where we got the money to deal. We did not have income tax. Income tax we had at times of war. So we had tariffs running the government, a few kind of product taxes that we had. But at the time of Abraham Lincoln, we got in the Civil War and there was so much money spent, they instituted a temporary income tax. And so that income tax, temporary tax that was there, it was temporary, got them to the war, then they got away from it, went back to tariffs. We kept tariffs, and that even as you get up to the 20th century, over 90% of federal income comes from tariffs. So when you look at the time of Woodrow Wilson, that's the first time we go to a progressive income tax where that we don't treat everyone the same. And by the way, just for tax policy in the Bible, God is into the flat tax, if you will, because I don't care if you look at a tithe, he wants 10%. Whether you're rich or poor, it's 10%. Now,
and Jesus did say about Caesar, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God. So Jesus is on board with taxes.
Poor will always pay less than the rich total amount, but everyone is treated exactly the same with that flat tax, if you will. So everyone has the same percentage. God doesn't say, well, if you're poor, it's only 2% tax, but if you're 2% tithe, and if you're rich, it's a 23%. It treats everybody the same. So that's the way we had the income tax until Woodrow Wilson. But even then, the income tax did not bring in much money. It was still tariffs and duties. And when you get to President Franklin Roosevelt, it's the first time really that tariffs and duties get set aside for an income tax. And so what we're living with now, thinking that duties and tariffs are unusual, that's only been in the last couple of generations. America existed on tariffs. And I think that's also a biblical teaching. Remember Jesus' economic teachings. When he was paying the temple tax, he looked at Peter. He said, Peter, he said, who's supposed to be paying the taxes? The children or the foreigners? And Peter said, foreigners, of course. He said, that's true. Jesus agreed. He said, but so that no one will be offended, go down, catch a fish. When you get the fish, get the gold coin, go pay our temple tax. But Jesus pointed out that it is not the sons who pay the tax, it is the foreigners who pay the tax. And that's what a tariff and a duty does. It keeps the tax off the people and puts it on those that are outside. And so that's what Trump
So America's got it both ways.
is doing right now. Most of us don't ask the question, why is it when you stand at an intersection in Europe, you never see an American car go through that intersection?
Now you stand at American intersection here in America, you're going to see all sorts of cars go through. But in Europe, you won't see them. Why? Because they've got a 26% tariff on all American cars, which prices the American car out of the market. So we don't have any competition, which is why we're averaging $130 billion a month in a trade deficit right now. Hard to have a good economy when you're $130 billion a month in a trade deficit.
No,
And
you're
that's
not
why
gonna
those duties and those tariffs, that's the way it had been from the very beginning. I think that was Jesus's kind of idea that the sons don't pay the taxes. It's the foreigners that pay the taxes, and that's what you do with the tariff.
You and I must be twins, because I said exactly those words a week ago when I tried to explain to people out in Australia, Asia, trying to tell them this is what the Bible says, that Jesus says the sons of the kingdom are exempt from the tax and you should be using tariffs. And it seems so outside of America, you need to know people are saying that Trump is dangerous. He's going to destroy the world economy. He's going to destroy the share market. And I said it's not going to happen. The share market will come back up. But I think that he has a plan that by dropping the share market, I think intentional.
I know, Diane, but I usually play Shawnee's vids for courtesy, but I don't want to take on it Michelle Obama.
That it then drove money into the treasury, into the bonds, and then that lowers the rates, which
Shawnee's links are interesting too.
Helps everybody. Even in Australia, they're talking about lowering the interest rates. One man, one leader with a strategic decision can lower expenses, oil price, and interest rate for everybody that's got a mortgage. You got to be happy. And Trump's done that without the cooperation of the Fed and other people who don't want to play ball with him, and he just forced their hand.
You can read Pastor Steve Cioccolati's prolific writing online or purchase a hard copy. Among
Amart's biggest bedroom event of the year is on now. Save on bedroom furniture, mattresses and more.
In a time of global volatility, we've never needed stability more, but that's not what Peter Dutton is offering.
In this video, and I think it's tied into something. I just have this weird. What's going on here, my friends? This is Tony. Hope you're all doing well. We had something rather curious over the last 48 to 72 hours. We saw it first in Europe, and then we saw it in America, and it makes me kind of wonder, is he
going to talk about power outages? I think he is.
Of course, connected. It's kind of interesting. So we had, of course, over in Europe, for, probably about 2 days ago now at this point, where they had power failures in, we're talking France, Spain, actually there's 4 countries, I think, Belgium and Italy, I think it was. And they, of course, they got the power back on. Everything's fine now, apparently. But it's kind of funny because a lot of people don't know about the fact that they just switched over to all solar, or mostly renewable energy, green energy to run their countries, right? And I thought it was kind of strange because I was looking at the sort of the output right before it happened, and they were using very little nuclear power. And I was like, why is that? Did they just turn them off?
Diane, you know me, I'm a muddlehead.
Flying it? Are they repairing them? And it's because they purposely did this, and because of they had little generation, and it caused it made it so they couldn't have spikes, and then that's why it went off. So it's kind of interesting because the next day we had a U.S. bank here go offline. We also had power failures here as well, and that's what we're going to get into in this video. And I think it's tied into something. I just have this weird thought in my head that it has something to do with these trade, this tariffs and all this stuff, and trying to get people. And it's successful, by the way. It was very successful because in UK and parts of Europe they now have empty. We're talking shelves. Why? Because everyone was concerned because they saw these power failures. They saw. But by the way, they had a new thing that just happened over there today, hacking on some supermarkets. Everyone's, oh no. So they're going to the store and buying up things, buying up all the toilet paper, whatever they're buying. And then now they have their story because they've been telling us for the last week, oh no, there's going to be empty shelves. oh no. So now they actually made it happen over in some of these countries in Europe. And let me just show you some of this. And it's kind of interesting because we also had someone just win, Mark Carney win over in Canada. And what he said as his first speech ties into all of this as well. I'll show you that in a minute. Let me just show you some of this stuff. So in America, we had more than 200,000 power failures in Pittsburgh. And that's not the only state. We also had it in Pennsylvania. This was like yesterday, I think it was. Then we had this. Major U.S. bank was hit by nationwide outage as users report issues with the credit cards. Now, that's not, and again, this happened in around the exact same time as these issues in the UK today at these supermarkets, two of them in Britain. M&S, which is a supermarket there in Britain, had some sort of hacking of their systems, and it wasn't just them. That's called Marks and Spencer is apparently the name. It's one of their chain stores, supermarkets there. They had another one also. I can't remember the other one's name. I'll show you in a second here. I think I have another one over here. Yeah, here we are. Co-op. There's another one called Co-op Supermarket.
Diane, I never understood that toilet roll rush. What can a toilet? You can't eat it. What? And if there's a famine, you're not going to poop anyway. So what's the point of it?
Kits that also had some sort of hacking of their IT systems. There are more than 2,500 co-op supermarkets in the UK. They have funeral homes and supermarkets? What? What? That just does not sound right, dude. Oh my goodness gracious. That doesn't sound like the best portfolio, to put those two together. At any rate, so that was happening in the UK. So we saw these things happening in Europe with the power failures. Then we saw it over here. Then we saw this hacking over there. Then we saw it over here. Kind of weird. We saw this also last year. I think in the summertime. I think it was like June, July last year. They had a bunch of it. You remember that whole cyber hacking? You remember actually the whole thing went down and there was blue screens on computers and stuff like that at businesses. I was on vacation at the time that happened, but I remember it because I was on vacation at the time. So what has this all led to? You remember what they've been saying for a week now? Oh no, empty shelves. And here we are. Oh, look, they're empty now. That's kind of weird. So it did work. It kind of worked, didn't it? So, and what's interesting about it is at the same time, we have something Walmart's now doing. Apparently, in some areas, they're requiring a subscription to use self-checkout. You have to pay a certain amount a year. I think it's like almost $100 a year or something, I think. Don't quote me on it. There was some other thing over here. How much was it? It's the Walmart Plus, whatever that costs. $13 a month or so. I don't know what it is. I can't remember. But there's a reason why they're doing this. Check this out.
Because this is what we are dealing with now, Walmart has decided to start charging people $98 to use self-checkouts, with many people stealing at the self-checkout by scanning different barcodes.
Yeah, okay, yeah, look at this. Scanning $50 diapers for 34 cents. So they use, okay, so I see what she's using. She's using a Kool-Aid packet, and then when she goes to scan the diapers, she puts the Kool-Aid packet right where the barcode is and shows its barcode instead. And of course,
what scumbags doing that?
Yeah, I can't catch that because it's underneath the diapers. Can't see underneath it. Yeah, so that's what they're doing in some areas. So, of course, this isn't Walmart wide. This isn't U.S. wide. This is in certain areas. Walmart stores may designate certain self-checkout lanes for Walmart Plus.
I'm guessing all the sanctuary cities would get that.
Subscribers using Scan and Go feature. Or for Spark delivery. It makes sense actually because those that are trying to scam, of course, the system probably wouldn't buy the subscription, although maybe they would. Maybe, especially if they're, I mean, you should see this one guy. Oh my goodness, how much he got. Let me back this up and show you this one. So this lady's talking about how to do it. there's all these videos going viral on TikTok and everywhere else talking about this, how to get away with it, right? Check this out.
Scanning it more than once and making them have to keep coming over there and deleting the shit, so they want to get away from you. Now, when you scan them more than once, you gonna ask them to come and take it off because you keep scanning shit. Are they gonna be so sick of your ass? I ain't gonna give you pay for them what you did. You ain't gonna pay for the few items left on the screen. You gonna get that stuff.
I love self checkout at Walmart. They give the best discounts.
Oh my goodness, look at this. So here we are, the Kool-Aid packet, right? He scans like maybe 20 Kool-Aid packets, probably, items that are anywhere from $5 to $50. In place of those prices, he gets 42 cents every time. He fills the entire back of his truck full of items, probably for like $30 or something, when it should have been $300 or something like that, right? So that's kind of what some of these people are doing. And now they're going to be charging in those areas where this happens frequently, subscription to even go through the self-scans. And on top of that, maybe even in some of the similar areas, you're going to see this as well, where they add a new self-checkout label where they basically put a sticker over the credit card screen to make sure, to show that it hasn't been tampered with. Because there's people that are also putting these LCD scanners on top of it and hooking it to it and then taking your credit card, of course, on top of that. So that's some of the latest stuff going on at Walmart's currently. Then you got Temu, of course, trying to tell you how much import charges you're going to be paying.
Diane, that's why I mentioned the sanctuary cities. They're pretty light. Like, apparently you can shoplift up to $1,000 before the coppers are even called. I think that's going on in the sanctuary cities.
And I think it's funny because
Especially
the way they did it was really bad. And I'm sure they're not going to continue doing this. The reason why is because they don't. You think you got an awesome deal? Oh, look, $60. It was $200, and then you get the import charges. It's back to almost $200 again, right? So it's only going to make everybody that's shopping there mad, and then they're going to be like, I don't want to use this website anymore, because they should have told you up front what the import charge was on it. And guess what? If it's not from China, you're not going to have that problem, are you? No, it's not going to be 80. And on top of that, 2 weeks from now, when China finally makes a deal with America, it ain't going to be $89. It's probably going to be $8 or something, right? So that's what they don't want to tell you. And of course, Amazon's already backed down from doing it. They were going to do it as well. They're going to put some sort of like tariff fee on the end, and they decided they're not. Jeff Bezos, kind of whipped out on that, decided not to do that. Of course, now you have the ports talking about how there's no inventory coming in 5 to 7 weeks. There's going to be nothing left in the stores. And then, of course, you're going to have hacking and other weird stuff happening as well.
This drop in volume with a number of major American retailers stopping all shipments from China based on the tariffs.
Yeah, the China piece of that is the most interesting. That's where it's about celebrating mums, telling them how wonderful they are and how much we miss them.
There isn't a distance you can travel where I can't reach you.
If it's a war you want, keep coming.
Is the text getting smaller? How do I increase the font? Where are my readers? Contact lenses designed for crisp, clear vision at all distances, in all lighting. All-day comfort. Ask your optometrist about AccuView Oasis Max Multifocal.
Now, I'm no psychic, and Uncle lost his crystal ball. So always make sure to plan ahead and regularly check the weather conditions before we head out. They can change quickly, so stay on top of it with bom.gov.au.
Snooze members save up to 40% off mattresses and bed frames, plus free local delivery.
The shipments are basically ground to a halt, you've said?
Yes, that's correct. And that makes up about 45% of our business here in Los Angeles, Becky. Now, what we have heard in talking directly to CEOs and...
You know what? What does that tell you? 45% of the business in LA is you buying stuff from a store and you working at the store and selling it. So literally half the jobs in LA have nothing to do with manufacturing anything. They're all simply selling stuff to Americans. Half of the business in America is selling stuff to Americans. Does that sound like a good avenue? You know what I mean? You need to be manufacturing things, not importing things to sell to Americans. Right? If you're manufacturing things, you're selling it to other countries, selling it to Americans, selling it everywhere, and it's going to be higher value. Working at GM, GM is going to be working better than working at Walmart, right? Obviously. So this is my point. They're trying to make, oh no, all these jobs. This entire thing is temporary. Like in a week or two, China's going to make a deal. Even if they keep saying, no, we're not doing anything. We're not going to. Let me explain it to you a very simple way, and I did it on my other channel as well. I'll give you two scenarios. Tell me which one's worse. You're in Walmart, you get kicked out of Walmart. They say you can't come back to this Walmart anymore. That's one scenario. Another scenario, you work at Walmart, you're an employee at Walmart, you get fired. You can never work there again. Which one sounds worse? If you're an employee and you make all your money from there, and you can no longer make money there, and you lost your job, is that worse than getting kicked out of a Walmart and not be able to purchase anything from Walmart again? I think it probably would be. I think it'd be worse. The guy losing the job would be much more upset than the guy getting kicked out of a store. Maybe he can go to a different Walmart or go to a Kroger or wherever. He can go anywhere he wants and buy stuff. This is the scenario that's going on. America is the guy that gets kicked out of buying Walmart stuff. And China is the employee at Walmart getting fired. Which one's in a worse scenario? Us or them? They are, right? So they're the ones that are the most concerned, even though they pretend they're not. And this is going to work because obviously you need to work to make money. And we are one of their biggest customers, so it makes no sense that they would be like pretending like, oh, we don't need you. Yeah, okay, dude. You don't need half of your customer base anymore. You don't need to, it just doesn't make any sense. So that's the only way you can see it. That's the right way to look at it. Now, of course, they want you to just freak out over this, short time of, oh no, everything's gonna fall apart. And here's an example.
Kevin, don't interrupt me. Who benefits when the stock market drops and people lose value in both their investments and also
now to get a deal. So yeah, it's been 4 weeks and we don't have a deal yet. They're working. They're very close to announcing them. India and Vietnam both announced tariffs on China. You think they would have done that if Trump hadn't shown that he was serious about standing up for the?
Ooh, they have tariffs on China too. This is way worse than I thought for China. This is really bad. They're pretending like this isn't going to bother them at all. It's like saying, like getting fired and saying, oh, it doesn't matter. I got fired. I don't need money. I don't need to work for anybody. I could just sit here and somehow conjure up food in front of me and just eat it. And just money will just fall out of the sky to me. This is literally, they got tariffs from India. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize that. Dude, that's crazy. They got like 70% of their customer base is saying, no, we ain't going to buy your stuff unless we get to sell into your country. And they're like, no, you can't sell to us, Chinese. You can't sell anything to us. But we must be able to sell stuff to you. You just can't sell to us anymore. Or you can't sell to us anything. This is basically what's going on. It's like an employee that gets fired and then he refuses to just, admit that he did something wrong so he can get the job back. It's pretty much what's going on here. And I didn't realize it was that bad. Of course, the stock market went down 6%, not 60%. Let me show you that here.
It's that the stock market is down 6%. Like it's not down 60%.
But this is what I think is so interesting, Andy. It's funny that they said these guys are just trying to talk about what's really going on here. It's a short, temporary thing. Soon China will agree to this. I didn't realize how bad it was for them. It's way worse than I thought. It's not just America. It's not 50% of their customer base. It's India and what was the other country? It was like big countries, all blocking them now, saying, "Look, you're going to have to buy our stuff. You don't want to buy from us? Okay, we ain't buying your stuff." They're in a really bad position. Why are we not in a bad position? Because we don't make anything for anybody except for Americans. So imagine once China agrees to this, we'll be able to sell our cars, our TVs, or whatever, anything we make from America to like this chair, whatever we make, anything we make, we'll be able to sell into China. They have supposedly 1.4 billion people. I actually don't think it's that high. And I did a video talking about that as well, because their cities are now emptying out. Beijing and Shanghai are empty. I'll show you that in a little bit. But the fact is, we'll be able to sell to them. We have, 350 million people here? They got maybe like a billion, whatever they got over there. We could sell maybe 3 times as many cars. Imagine GM being able to sell 3 times as many cars as they used to. 3 times as many cars. Ford, 3 times as many trucks. You think that's not going to bring the prices down? The more they sell, the more they make, the cheaper the price is. So it will make it cheaper to buy cars in the future. It'll make it cheaper to buy lots of stuff in the future because more of it will be made and it'll be sent over to other countries. On top of that, it'll make tons more jobs here in America. If we're making 3 times as many cars, they're going to need 3 times as many workers. So then you're going to have lots more factories in America building cars, building this, that, and the other. And it's funny that almost no one understands this. You got all these investors that don't know anything about manufacturing, don't know anything about engineering, don't know anything about these type of topics, saying, oh, they don't even know what they're talking about. They're like clueless. Oh no, the stock market went down 6%. Let's stop now. Who cares? It goes down 6% all the time. Who cares? It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. This is when you have people that don't know what they're talking about talking. That's what happens. All right. So at any rate, a little bit passionate there. You get kind of the idea. China in talks. No, we're not talking. We're not going to kneel. Okay, fine. You have no job. Good luck with that, bro. See how far you get. I mean, you got empty cities now. Everyone's leaving. Your young generation's already quitting jobs because they don't like working anymore. Because they're probably working too many hours because they don't have enough kids. So now their cities are emptying out, and the ones that are, we're overworked and are sick of it. Right here. I'll show you that. You got to understand the dynamics of what's going on here. Broke and burned out young workers are coming together under a new banner called Rat People, where they just lay around in bed all day and play video games. They're like, I don't want to work. sounds familiar. I've heard of that before. It sounds familiar. I think I've seen that over here sometimes. So they're burned out because there's not enough young people to work these new jobs that they had there. So they're just like, I'm sick of working in endless hours. I'm just going to stay home and do nothing. Right? So, I mean, they're already burned out there. On top of them having empty cities for some strange reason there as well. And of course, and I think it has something to do with the population, of course, collapsing. Check this out.
What we face is population collapse. Collapse. Like people have no idea how fast the population is going to collapse. Like a low growth rate is a slow death.
See, this is what I'm saying. It's happening in China right now. And they're telling us that it's not happening. But you have all these people in China saying it is. This lady shows what's going on. She shows the subway system. Where is that at? She shows the subway system in here somewhere. Anyway, I showed it over here. I mean, it's like empty. And I showed videos in my previous videos showing the malls empty. There's like people in China taking all these videos like, what's going on? Like nobody's here anymore. Like there's nobody in the city. What happened? And these are the biggest cities in China, Shanghai and Beijing. They're like 20 million people each or something. They're not, I don't know if they're the biggest, but they're pretty big. I think there's one bigger. I remember there's one, it's like a weird one in the mountains that's doing well right now. And it's got these weird levels. People made videos on it. You can go weird video of, a city on the mountains. It'll have like these massive areas where you think you're walking on the ground, but you're not. It's you're actually walking on top of buildings. And then it goes down. It goes like this, like a stair, and it's so massive you think you're walking on the ground. That's something else, but you can go check that out if you want. But the fact is, they had a one, child, of course, policy from 1975 to 2015. How did they grow this big with one, child? I mean, you can't. So that's why some people are wondering about what's going on with that as well. But anyway, so you get kind of the idea of what's going on there. And I'm going to get into this in another video. We have some weird stuff going on with Katy Perry. I'll probably do that in my next video. There's actually a bunch of strange things going on. I'm convinced Katy Perry landed on the moon and she sent an alien back in her place. I'm going to have to do a video on this too. So yeah, we have some weird stuff going on with her. I'll probably do that in the next video. At any rate, so you get kind of the idea of what's going on with some of this.
And
Then
women astronauts, they had the Baphomet on their arm tag, like how they sew in your regiment or whatever. They had the Baphomet. Okay, what have we got lined up? Canadian. Where is it? Where is it?
State of Israel forming some 77 years ago. Hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News for this Wednesday,
Good
the
night,
30th
Di.
day of April, 2025. And a number of really important stories have come across the wire since we talked to you earlier this morning. One story is that Israel is now 77. The day with Israel begins in the evening, and at nightfall in Israel, they had the commemoration of the anniversary of the modern state of Israel forming some 77 years ago. Now, it was May 14th, 1948 on our calendar, but the Israeli calendar is a little bit different, and so it switches each year what day it falls on. But the point is, Israel, the modern state of Israel, has been around now, 77 years anniversary, and we'll talk about it tomorrow in some detail in the next few days. So happy birthday, Israel. Literally a modern miracle, one of the greatest miracles of history. Also, too, we did in between our first edition of Breaking News, Your Bible Questions Answered. What happened was, I'm going through, I finished it, by the way, both on the app and on the website and on YouTube. They're all listed, the various questions, all 92 of them that we've dealt with on Your Bible Questions Answered, so you can scroll down and look at those. One of them, though, I had with the wrong piece on it. I had it into Breaking News. That was the one about the King James Version, and I'm not really good at this, some of the computer stuff. I do a lot of it, but I figured something out. I couldn't figure out how to put the heading on, the right heading. So I just did it again and put it in, released it today. And interesting, whenever I do this one on the King James Version, I always get a few people who really get riled up and excited and not very thrilled with what I do. But most of them don't read what I say. And it's more of an emotional argument than an intellectual argument, because when you read what we've written, there's not a whole lot you can say. Three major problems as we deal with the King James Version. One, a lot of the words that are used in the King James Version of 1611 are barely recognizable by many people in the English language. They still may be in the language, but we don't understand really what they mean. Most people don't. Then there's a ton of words that are no longer in the English language, number two, that have fallen out. And so we have not the slightest clue what they mean. But the biggest problem is, and that is since 1611, a lot of the words that we use today had a different meaning in 1611. The meaning has changed. And so that's why we don't recommend reading the King James Version first. You could read it, and I suggest you do read it, but read it along with another translation, because many of the words, again, that were used in 1611 are still used today, but sometimes with an entirely different meaning. And so that's why you need to get a translation that has, modern terms and modern words. And so that's why we don't recommend using the King James as the priority translation, although you should read it, because there are a lot of good things about it. But again, because of the fact that many words don't mean the same thing as they meant in 1611, that's number one reason why you shouldn't use it as your primary translation. All right, things are going on here at Israel. Huge fires are raging around Jerusalem. The independence ceremony was canceled. They had a recorded rehearsal screened instead. It's from the Times of Israel. Fire officials say fires may be Israel's largest ever. You've got high winds, you've got heat, and you've got these fires going on. European countries are sending aid. Motorists forced to abandon vehicles. Fire hits one highway. Celebration nixed nationwide. So they're not celebrating tonight as they usually do, Tel Aviv and elsewhere, because of the fires and because of the wind. Headline number two, Israel ablaze is a national emergency believed to be a terrorist act. And herein lies the problem. This is from the Jerusalem Post. The source confirmed that several arrests have been made in connection with the suspected arson attacks, but declined to give more details due to the ongoing investigation. A massive wildfire broke out on Wednesday in Israel in the forest between Eshtaol and Latrun, west of Jerusalem, forcing evacuations and road closures as thousands gathered across the Jewish state for Memorial Day observances. Fanned by high temperatures, low humidity, and strong winds, the fire, believed to have been set intentionally, spread rapidly through multiple locations across Israel. It's a terror attack on Israel, said Eli Be'er, president of the United Hatzalah Emergency Response Organization. He told Media Line this. He noted the fires were started in 20 separate locations. A security source also confirmed to Media Line that a terrorist act was likely behind the fires, adding that several people had been arrested. Several individuals from East Jerusalem had been arrested by Israeli police on suspicion of attempting to ignite fires in the area, including a man in his 50s who was arrested after allegedly trying to set fire to an open field in South Jerusalem. And when confronted by the police, he attempted to flee, but of course was apprehended after a brief chase. And they found on him a lighter, cotton, and other incendiary materials in his possession. So with this horrible weather, you've got huge, hot, dry winds, low humidity, intense heat. It's just a natural for fires. And when you have people starting them, therein lies the problem. Well, here's headline number 3, which really seals the deal. All you have to do is burn. Hamas calls to set fires in Jerusalem and in the West Bank. This is from the Jerusalem Post. Youth of the West Bank, youth of Jerusalem, and those inside Israel set cars ablaze. Gaza awaits the revenge of the free, the terrorist organization wrote. Hamas posted a message encouraging Palestinians to burn whatever you can of groves, forests, and settler homes on the Telegram app on Wednesday. Youth of the West Bank again set cars ablaze, etc., etc. Earlier, the Yanin News Network Telegram channel called on Palestinians to burn the groves near the settlements in a post on Telegram on Wednesday. As wildfires continue to burn across central Israel, the channel posted a photo of a masked person setting a fire to a field as the town burns in the background with the text, "Settlers' homes will be ashes under the feet of the revolutionaries," and hashtag "burn settlers' houses." So the wildfires again broke out in the Judean hills on Wednesday morning and have spread across Jerusalem as the day continued. Again, on social media, the fires were also branded as, quote, "the flames of the flood," echoing Hamas's name for the October 7th flood of Al-Aqsa. And Al-Aqsa, of course, now this is important, it's the mosque there on the Temple Mount, the gray mosque that's on the southern end, not the Golden Dome. That's called the Dome of the Rock. That's just a shrine. It's not a mosque. On the far southern part of the Temple Mount is this mosque called the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And they've actually named the entire Temple Mount Al-Aqsa. It is the holy site, supposedly now the third holiest site in Islam. Although the Quran doesn't mention it until the middle of the 19th century. Jerusalem was kind of persona non grata as far as the Quran was concerned and Islam was concerned. But anyway, point is, one of the reasons for the October 7th massacre, they said after the fact, is because they believed the Israelis were going to go up on the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa, and destroy the Dome of the Rock, destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and build a third temple. And of course, that is not in their mind right now, but this is the situation that they are promoting. Now, also, Palestinian news channel called Akhbar Philistine tweeted on their account, on our X account on Twitter, they have 112,000 followers, a call to the revolutionary youth and all the heroes of the West Bank. Again, settlers' homes in the surrounding areas are your target. Burn them with your Molotov cocktails and set fire to the grass at the settlement outposts. And again, like we said, it's probably one of the worst fires in Israel, modern Israel's history, and it's still burning. It's very, very dangerous. A lot of people have been taken in for smoke inhalation and that, so we'll keep that in prayer. But that's the start of Independence Day. And again, none of the ceremonies could be held. The ceremony that was shown was a rehearsal ceremony there because they couldn't get out and do it because of the smoke from the fires. All right, let's switch gears here. Now, here's a real interesting story. This is in the Epoch Times. Russia-Ukraine conflict still too complicated for a quick peace deal. This is from the Kremlin. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said negotiators will need to resolve a whole series of nuances before they can bring an end to the Russia-Ukraine war. The end of the Russian-Ukraine war is not just around the corner, and negotiators still face several complexities. He announced this today, April 30th. Speaking at a press briefing on Wednesday, Peskov said Russian President Vladimir Putin remains interested in a ceasefire and eventual peaceful settlement to the conflict. But before doing this, it is necessary to answer a number of questions and resolve a whole series of nuances. He offered these comments as President Donald Trump marked his 100th day in office. Now, again, Trump made setting the ongoing war a focus for his 2024 campaign, and at times on the campaign trail, he suggested he could negotiate an end to the conflict within 24 hours of taking office. In a January interview with Fox News, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, Trump's special envoy for Ukraine, offered a more relaxed goal to reach a deal within Trump's first 100 days in office. Last week, Trump said Russia and Ukraine were very close to a deal. However, here comes the however. We mentioned it here on Breaking News. In his comments to reporters yesterday, well, actually today, Wednesday, Peskov suggested a deal was still to take time to finalize. And Trump said the same thing, if you recall that yesterday also. We understand that Washington is willing to achieve a quick success in this process, but at the same time, we hope for understanding that the settlement in the Ukrainian crisis is too complicated to be done overnight, the Kremlin spokesman said. They have sought to bar Ukrainian entry into NATO. That's one of their, red lines. That's Russia's red line, and have raised concerns that Ukraine poses a continuing threat to Russian national interests. On Wednesday, Peskov said Putin has tried to resolve these concerns peacefully before launching the Russian forces into Ukraine in 2022. He said the Russian president remains committed to his war goals and to preserving Russian national interests. In recent weeks, Trump has repeatedly acknowledged the possibility that Putin may be dragging his feet in all this about the peace process. Earlier this month, both Trump and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio both warned that the U.S. could actually back away from its mediator role if it doesn't see clear signs of progress towards an eventual peace settlement. When he recently acknowledged